Just as a little bit of background, so that those of you who weren't at the last meeting or the last event, understand that Zheng Shengtian is a very unusual man in that he graduated from the Hangzhou Academy, which is now called the China Art Academy, and stayed there as a teacher, as a young teacher, and was approximately 28 years old when the Cultural Revolution started. Is that right? 27. So you do the math, you can figure out what's going on over here. He looks like he's 45, right? Okay, so he was a young teacher at the Hangzhou Academy, which is a very important and continues to be an extremely important art academy in China. Actually has graduated, for those of you who may not know, but some names, people like Wang Guangyi and Wu Shandran and Zhang Pei and Deng Jianyi and Chou Zhujie and Yang Pudong, and some of the really major artists of China. So it continues to be, was in its time, and continues to be today, the incubator for some of the most interesting and experimental art in China. At that time in China in the 1980s, and we won't get to the 1980s, or we'll just touch upon it, Zheng Shengtian was the head of the oil painting department. And the oil painting department is exactly where people like Wang Guangyi and Geng Jianyi and even Zhang Pei was in the oil painting department at that point in time. So working under Zheng Shengtian. So his influence or his impact on these people is very, very large, and they all recognize that. But so he had this unusual situation in the Cultural Revolution, working as a young teacher, and then working, obviously he's going to talk about it, and then continued through the 80s at the Hangzhou Academy. So I just wanted to give a little background. So I think what we're going to do, maybe we can see the first slide, and maybe we can figure out whether this works or not. Where we left off, and again, I think relating in many ways to Chen Xiaomei's talk, is just like China is not a monolith, and I think we can all agree on that here in this room. Nobody thinks China is all the same for people or anybody who's been exposed to China. But the Cultural Revolution wasn't a monolith. It went through various stages. And where we left off was really what we characterized, or what Zheng Shengtian characterized as the chaotic years. So maybe you can give a little tiny review of the chaotic years, and then talk about this slide and go on from there.
Sure.
And if anybody has questions, please.
Yes. First, I would like to thank China Institute to inviting me back to continue my story, and also thank Jane for your introduction. I really enjoyed Professor Chen's talk about the theater. But my experience during the Cultural Revolution, also as my personal view of this Cultural Revolution from a young teacher, a young artist. So I cannot speak on behalf of those people who were suffered a lot, or were tortured, or even killed. We all know this 10 years was a disaster for China. There's a lot of things damaged, a lot of life lost. But also, it was a part of the Chinese history, modern history, which is very complicated and very important. So to ignore this, because last time I mentioned, when I organized the art show for about Cultural Revolution in China Society, 2009, Asia Society, 2009, I discussed with a very important Chinese scholar in Beijing, and he said that there is no art during the Cultural Revolution. It's all propaganda, all like the posters or portraits which serve the revolutionary goal, and you cannot consider those art. I disagree with him because there are millions of artists during that time try to using art as a mean to express themselves. And they all have different kind of a life experience. They all have different fates during this 10 years period. So I'm going to tell you about my experience as a young teacher in Hangzhou, in one of the major Academy of Fine Arts in China. And as Jane just mentioned that the first 2 years, from 1966 to probably mid of 1968, those are the first phase of Cultural Revolution. Was chaos, violent, very intensive. The whole country, like the system collapsed. There was people moving around and a lot of debate, fighting, even almost like a civil war. But at the end of 1968, situation cools down, and there is major two things happen. One is this, what we saw, this movement of Shangshan Xiaxiang, it's called go to the countryside and the border areas, or up to the mountain, down to the countryside. It's kind of a campaign to organize the young people, form a Red Guard, to the countryside. It started actually voluntarily. It's not like many people thought it's by order of the government or the party leader force those young people going to the country. Actually, it was began by some young Red Guards because they feel after 2 years fighting with each other, then they find that this is like meaningless, what we are doing. We are all colleagues, we are all schoolmates, what we are fighting for. So the real revolutionary goal is to change this country. And our country, majority people are living in the countryside. So that's why they want to go to countryside to help farmers. So it was the first group, I think it is a few students from Beijing. They want to go to in Mongolia. And the second group was in Yunnan province. I think from south, they want to go to border. Those remote area, most poor Chinese living in really very primitive, bad conditions. So they want to go to help them. They call this continue our revolution. But then later on, of course, there's some practical reason is that many high school students which entered the school in 1966 or 65, 66, they have to graduate. We call them Lao Sanjie. So when they graduate, you have to find job for them. And there was at that time, because many factory closed, there was not enough job can provide to those young people who graduate from high school. So that's one of the reasons government start to organize every city, every level of the Chinese government to organize that kind of a group and assign them to different area in the countryside, some in the like northwest, like Yan'an. Some students even went to Yan'an, the revolutionary base, and some went to Mongolia or to Yunnan province, to very remote area. So then become more and more. That lasts probably from 68 until 70, early 70s. But also there's another situation many people probably didn't know is that in early 19 1969, China and the Soviet Union start this confrontation. There was some kind of battle happened in Heilongjiang province. So Chinese leaders thought they worry about a major attack from Soviet Union. So Ling Biao, the Marshal Ling Biao was the #2 leader in China at the time, issued an order, asked for nationwide kind of an evacuation. You know, people has to leave the city, go to the countryside because it's safer if there is a kind of a atomic bomb or whatever attack, so you can help to, you know, save the manpower in the countryside. So these two events actually happened about the same time. So many schools followed the order, moved to the countryside. So not only young kids, you know, graduate from school, sent it to countryside, but so the whole campus, like our school in Hangzhou, at that time called the Zhejiang Academy of Art, we had this 1 week notice. In 1 week, everyone has to move. So we evacuate from Hangzhou. First, we moved to this village, a small town called the Sanjie. If you read Hu Lancheng's book, you will know Sanjie is his hometown. Hu Lancheng, you know, this writer, Zhang Ailing's lover, husband. And this is his hometown. Very beautiful area. Actually, I revisited in 2013. This is the picture I stopped on the highway. And but when we moved there, this is just very old kind of a high school campus, because we from Hangzhou, our school has about 250 people, including faculty, staff, and the students. We have to find a place to stay. The notice was so short that we couldn't build anything. So we just used their classroom of this high school. There was a winter time, it's a New Year, Chinese New Year. So we, in like a couple of days, we moved, all the people moved from Hangzhou to this area. We live in like a dormitory, like army camp style. 20 people living in one room. You just have your blanket on the floor, and then. But of course, that cannot last long because you need to find the food, you know, to eat. Have to cook. So a lot of problems occur after a few days. So eventually, as I remember, we were there only less than 1 month. Then we moved back, and the school started to look for another site. Now, we choose a much more beautiful land to relocate. This is a village called Meirongzheng in Tonglu County. And this is along this very beautiful Fuchun River, which we can see from famous Wang Gongwang's painting, Fuchun Sanju Tu. It's that area. So we were very fortunate to move to this area. But the first few months, we didn't have a building for ourselves. We have to live with farmers. But I think for many people like me, we grew up in the city. We spend most of our time in the city, in kind of a developed area. Then to stay in a farm, it's really a very good experience. I think many people of our generation will agree, because before we lived with farmers, we had no idea. How do they live? How do they work? And what is the living condition like in the countryside? What do they eat? What, even what they planned, or what kind of a labor they have to take. All this we don't have good idea of the reality. But to live in the village like this for a much longer time, I think we learned a lot. And many young students, of course, they in the city they may be spoiled, but then could come to the countryside, they are facing a real challenge in any aspect of their life. So I remember we, in this village, because we have to share, we have to live in farmers' home. So each one small village only can host maybe 5, less than 10 people. Then we spread out in the whole area, live with farm, become their family member. So we eat with them, work with them. I remember as a young man, I was very enthusiastic about this new life experience. Because in the city, if you come to our last conversation, in the city, the Cultural Revolution for intellectuals was all humiliation, criticism, humiliation, torture. Even, I was arrested by the Red Guard for a few months. But come to the countryside, suddenly you feel kind of a freedom, because the farmer doesn't, they don't have this kind of a stereotype view of intellectuals. If you treat them well, they like you. If you help them, they respect you very much. And so they judge you not because like how much knowledge you have, or what's the position, your professor or your lecturer. They judge you by what do you do, how you see, what kind of a relationship you build with them. I believe I was, because at that time I was still young, strong, and a lot of energy. So I would get up in the morning, early morning. We don't, in the village, it didn't have running water. So I had to walk all the way to the river, to the Fuchun River, and have this shoulder pole, carry this bucket of water, from the river, and then going up to the house I stay. It's a very long walk and steep and slippery. It's the first couple of times I will fall down, have to go back to get water. But soon I learned how to do this, skillfully carry this shoulder pole. And so I will fill the water tank for my hosts every morning. And so then they like me because I help them. Usually they have to do this themselves, but now this young man, offer help. So then they will see you as their family member. And also I told Jen I like to do a haircut. I cut people's hair. In the school, even my classmates. But in the countryside, especially, I find that it was the people need haircut, but they don't have money to go to the nearest town to have. So many people have a very long hair, and I brought my a barber skill to become like an amateur barber. Working in the country, I almost do this every day, in my leisure time after working the field. the busiest day, I cut 40 people's hair. From very young, like a newborn baby, to once I remember I was most unforgettable experience. I cut a dead man's hair. They asked me to do. But anyway, I built very good relationship. I think that was the first time I really know. I was born in an intellectual family. My father was professor, my mother was teacher. So all the people I know around me, they are educated people. So this is like the first time I spend every day, every week, every month with farmers, and really to know the good quality of Chinese farmer. Even their life condition is very poor, but they are very honest, they are very friendly, work very hard, and their value, I think, was very high. Their moral value. I learned a lot from farmers. So once we talk about the Cultural Revolution, I think the greatest damage of the Cultural Revolution is to destroy this kind of a value which exists in China throughout the history. But the Cultural Revolution was, in very short 20 years, and this value lost. I went to China, back to some rural area. I couldn't find, everybody was just looking for money, to make money. And that kind of honesty, and that kind of kindness, compassion, I couldn't find. So that's why sometimes I talk about Cultural Revolution, still have this kind of a nostalgic kind of feeling. It gives me positive memory, not all negative. Of course, I know many bad stories, but also I think for many young people during that period, like in the countryside, there was very positive impact in their life. So I had this idea to paint this historical kind of a trip to the south. Mao is standing there with the whole, like half of China behind him. And then our leaders thought, because of this painting getting very popular, printed many copies, and then also reproduced in the public square, even like Shanghai railway station. Many places in China had the reproduction. So our leader in the school, they were very proud of this, because this is their credit. They think our school produced a good, very popular painting. So they sent this copy to Beijing to show to Mao's wife, Jiang Qing. And because Jiang Qing knew this trip was mainly Mao's talk was criticize her. So she didn't like this painting. So Jiang Qing said that, well, if people like it, doesn't mean it's a good painting. I will introduce you a real good painting, which is Mao goes to Anyuan. So that become a model painting. But here I show, you go back, I show a very interesting painting here. That painting is original painting we produced during Cultural Revolution. This is the image I found on internet. Someone put this for sale, and saying it's my painting. It's my study of that painting, which is not true. So it's a fake. But I want to show you is because this is a kind of a process. At the time our teacher taught students, is how to create the portrait. This is a procedure, number 1, number 2, number 3. So it's not my painting, but I think there was a good record of this cultural revolution. Yeah, and this is the Mao Ghost Triangle. That's created by artist Liu Chenhua. At the time, he was a student of the Central Academy of Craft and Design. And he, in 2009, I interviewed him. He gave me the whole story of how this painting was produced. So if you are interested in this, we don't have time to talk too much detail, but you can find it online. And also, I think in Asia Society website, you can find it. But I want to point out that one of the reasons this painting gets very popular is the image of Mao. It's going to countryside. It's going to workers, go to farmers. So that exactly at that time was the slogan, which the government, which the leader put on every newspaper, magazine, is to ask people to follow Mao, to go to the countryside, go to the farmers, go to workers. And so the image of Mao goes to Anyuan is taken from a story which in 1927, Mao left home and went to Anyuan, which is a mining area, to work as with miners, to organize the revolutionary event. So the painting gets so popular because Jiang Qing promoted, and every publishing house or magazines all have this image. It will say the print number of this painting was more than 100 million. So it's become the largest print number of a painting in the history. Even you can see many pictures when the young student went to countryside, they will carry this poster or reproduction of this painting. It's everywhere. So it become a symbol of like a flag of going to the countryside. We all follow Mao. Next. And of course then during that time there's many artists follow that kind of model painting style. They paint more Mao's painting and or something related to this kind of a revolutionary style. And in 1974, 72 and 74, there were national exhibition organized. So more and more painting produced and exhibited in major cities like Beijing and Shanghai. Okay. Yeah, but not every artist are working in that direction. There are some artists now we call the underground artists, or we heard about the no-name group, but that was a no-name group was composed of a group of young artists, but also there are senior artists. There are some artists who studied before the revolution. They didn't follow the direction of this revolutionary realistic style. They work on their own, but they have to hide or do something in a very different kind of situation. This story is about my teacher Wang Liuqiu. He was born in an overseas Chinese family in Thailand, but in 1937 he went to Yan'an to join the revolution. So he was one of the earliest revolutionary artists in Yan'an. He made this woodcut gift to the army in New Year. He became very famous. So when I went to Hangzhou as a student, he was my teacher and the chairman of oil painting department. But his painting, even at that time, it was a little different with other socialist, realistic style kind of painter. And like this Evacuating is a painting about revolution, but not the bright side of a revolution, but instead it's like a sad side. It's a more painful, like a negative experience of the failure of a revolution. So he was criticized. In 1957, he was labeled as a rightist. Then he lost his right to teach. So in about 10 years, he was working as a in high school affiliated with Hangzhou Academy. And sometimes even worked as a janitor, to clean the washroom. And so in the Cultural Revolution, a person like him had even worse kind of opportunity, and the student treat him really badly. So he couldn't stay in the school. Then he ran away from campus. He said, I want to go back to my home. I voluntarily joined the revolution. Now I voluntarily withdraw. I want to go home, go to Thailand. So he traveled a long way, get to the border in Yunnan province. It is a river, Lanchangjiang, the river between Burma and China. He swam in water for 2 days. Finally, he was exhausted. He thought that he already get on the other side of the land. Unfortunately, it was not. It's still in China side. So he was arrested by militants, in the local. And that he was taken back to Hangzhou. And he was sentenced 10 years in jail in the labor camp. But in the labor camp, he managed to find the house paint to paint. And so he finds some time, use the house paint to paint on the board with this very different style. He was influenced mainly by French expressionism. So you can see even the landscape, it's a kind of a Monet style. And then some sketches of the inmates in the labor camp. They are working, cutting the onion, and this is one of the engineer also was, for some reason, was in the prison. He made 40, 50 paintings during that time. And fortunately, all these paintings he made in the camp survived. Now, later on, he donates the collection to the Shanghai Art Museum. So I thought that this is a very unique story to see there are painters who still keep working in their own style and by their own way. And we should probably find more, if we do the research.
We're going to have to stop with you again.
Yeah.
Okay, you can talk about your work and then we'll go to questions.
Quickly show this. At that time, I was allowed to back to the studio to do some paintings, but of course, we have to spend most time travel to countryside or to other area to paint a revolutionary theme. So this is some sketches of watercolor I did during that time. We start to accept students, but they are not real like the class we offered after 1977. It's still kind of a workshop, but it's a long-term workshop, say 6 months or 1 year. And we take this student mostly to the site to teach them Like I brought the student to Zhejiang, it's a small village northeast of Beijing, and because there was a famous story during the World War II. It took place in this area, so we went there. We do sketches on the side and make some kind of a picture story, 连环画, from the local history, and to publish those books. So that's the kind of art we are allowed to do during that time. So this is one of the composition I did with my wife. The young girls went to Inner Mongolia. Okay, we finished with this main forest, 4 April, May, April 5th movement, when people went to Tiananmen Square to commemorate Zhou Enlai. And it was a picture of me and a picture of my daughter. And we did a lot of painting about Zhou Enlai. I think now you can read many stories about Zhou Enlai, tell you about his very complicated life or his swinging political position. But I think for many people at that time, Zhou Enlai is symbolized like justice or some kind of a positive part of a communist party. So we saw him as a Qingguan, it's more for the people. It's like the hope of the cultural revolution, because we believe in the government that still has a good person there to help. So that's why after Zhou Enlai's death, there's many exhibitions organized. All the paintings are about Zhou Enlai, about his story. So I did this one about his long march, and then also this the morning is a little illustration for the poem which pasted in Tiananmen Square during that event.
Well, I think that we have to come back for part 3.
Yeah,
why don't we end with your paintings and the death of Zhou Enlai. Obviously, Mao dies the same year, a few months later. But I just want to thank you very much, and then we'll go for some questions. But if people need to leave because it is after 8 o'clock already, they can leave. But thank you very much.